go ahead and get started. Since we're on the hour, we are so lucky to have our incredible guest speakers here tonight. And thank you guys so much for being here. So, just to start off without further ado, so first we have Dr. Gianakos, who is a foot and ankle surgeon at Yale. And she has such an inspiring story where she, similar to a lot of us on the call, came from an osteopathic school, didn't have a lot of abundant resources in research, and she has just paved the way. I constantly like open JAOS and I feel like I see her name like all the time. And it's just been really incredible to see how she has built a reputation and gotten into such a prestigious institution. And so we're excited to hear her journey about that today. She also has been involved with the Speak Up Ortho, where she's the current president through Jackson Orthopedic Society. So she's just incredible. We're so lucky to have her again. And then, of course, everyone also knows Dr. Aiyer, who I mean, his CV is so big, it's hard to encapsulate. But in addition to being a reviewer and editor for multiple journals, he is a foot and ankle specialist as well. And he's at Johns Hopkins. So also worked his way from a really humbling story to being able to now be at such a prestigious institution and has made such a prominent name for himself. And so for tonight, I have a bunch of general questions with the focus being on for those of you that are like me that came from a more humble background, didn't have research mentors, and how does the process actually work when you're at an academic institution? What are the steps? What are things we should be aware of? And really learning from their guidance. And I want this to be as open of a discussion as possible. For those of you who don't have your cameras on, feel free to put them on if you'd like. You are welcome to ask questions directly. This is for you. The goal of this is to help you get an edge and learn the skills and basic fundamentals that you oftentimes aren't taught, especially if you're not at a large academic center or you come from like an osteopathic background. So, with that, I just wanted to get started. And if you guys could share a little bit about your story. I know some of the people on this webinar has heard about you guys in the past with prior webinars, but if you could just share a little bit about how you got into your specialty and your institution and a little bit about your roles there regarding research.
Tabs, you want to go first?
Oh, you, Ariana.
All right. Well, so anyway, thanks for having me. I'm Ariana Gianakos. It's great to be on the call, and I think this is a really cool webinar topic and series. And I think sometimes it's hard to find places that you can go and have some interactive discussions. So I'm glad that this is a very easy panel. And so please all feel free to ask us whatever you want, whether it's either via a direct message in the chat or just, raising your hand. As far as my background, so I actually feel like I didn't really have the straight line path when it came to residency and orthopedics and life in general. I was a little bit of a late bloomer. I actually applied to medical school thinking I'd do pediatrics, not even orthopedics. I just didn't have any surgeons or any doctors, yeah, on either side of the family. So didn't really think orthopedics was in the cards for me and that I could physically do it. And then after doing some rotations, and also my background of sports injuries, and I had two ankle surgeries, two knee surgeries, having that background, just like so many of us orthopods, I always enjoyed the field. And I actually took a research year between my third and fourth year. I worked at Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City under Dr. Joe Lane, who was in metabolic bone disease. So we did a lot of like osteoporotic research and osteopenia and different types of bone metabolism type of research. And that really solidified my decision to pursue orthopedics. It also really gave me a good core background knowledge of how to conduct proper research, which I was able to then translate into residency and so forth. So happy to at some point answer some questions about research years if that's of particular interest. I did my residency in New Jersey and then went on to a foot and ankle fellowship in Boston, did an international travel fellowship in foot and ankle sports medicine, and now I'm here at Yale, where a lot of my research is focused on sporty foot and ankle, MIS foot and ankle, and I'm actually one paper away from completing my PhD at the University of Amsterdam Medical Center. I'll be defending that hopefully in the fall. I started that at the end of residency into fellowship, did a little hiatus when I was in board collection, and part of my travel fellowship was in Amsterdam, so it's under a physician I worked with there. And so once again, can talk about that type of branch off if you're interested in either doing a PhD or doing additional research work on topics, because it's really important to narrow your topic of things you like to do, because you'll end up being more productive if you're doing research on things that are of interest. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and answer calls, and I'll give this over now to the boss of the bosses over here.
Y'all are making me sound way too fancy. So I'll start by saying I stick out like a sore thumb at Hopkins because I'm the least Hopkins individual in this entire joint. And I claim that very robustly because people around here like to be referred to as Doctor this and Doctor that. Very personally, I don't like it. So for those of you who, and even for some of our current residents, I literally will stop responding to them if they refer to me as Dr. Aiyer. So call me Tabs, please. So I'm Tabs. My full name is Amitabh, but everyone calls me Tabs, much to my parents' chagrin. I was also thinking pediatrics for like the longest time and was going to do pediatric oncology. And I think everyone assumed I had the personality for it, but I fell into ortho kind of serendipitously because plastic surgery was, kind of occupied during my surgical block during third year of medical school. And the interesting part is that was thinking plastics purely because I've been watching way too much reality TV at that point. At least that's what my brother's, kind of assumption is. But I did ortho, and it was just so ridiculously cool to see sort of the change. And that was seeing hip and knee replacements, and to kind of just see like how you can take someone who's debilitated 1 minute and see the impacts on their life, quality of life, ambulatory capability, whatever. The next minute was pretty epic. Never mind the fact that we were impacting metal into people on like a regular basis, which is also pretty badass. So at that time, similar to what Ariana said, I was pretty late. The context of I hadn't even thought about it. This is now the tail end of my third year, but I was class president. I had done a bunch of extracurriculars. I had little to no research. I had decent board scores at the time. So my chair at Drexel, which is a program that no longer exists, said to me, "Go ahead and apply anyway. I think you are you'll be fine." And so I ended up 17 interviews, 13 ranks, zero match. And that's the interesting thing that people always like, oh my God, how did that happen? And it's like one of those things where like you just never know what's going to happen. But suffice to say, it was hard being up there, sort of in front of my class as class president, and like, yeah, I didn't match, and just kind of having to stomach that. But I realized that the biggest deficit I had was research, and I don't think I really appreciated the sort of translational nature of it. So it was a huge blessing in disguise because then I did research in Philadelphia at an institution called the Rothman Institute, also part of Thomas Jefferson, which is pretty renowned for orthopedics anyway. And then did it with the joints guy, and then that was what really cemented, no pun intended, my interest in orthopedics, but then also in academics. And that was sort of the reason why I was like, hey, I'm going to go down this route more than likely. So fast forward, I applied the next year, matched that following year, and I was in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where I also then came across my now wife. No, it was not a Grey's Anatomy or the Pitt kind of scenario, maybe more like the Pitt than anything. Not that I watched that show, but just as an FYI. But really, I thought I was going to do joints, and then fast forward, and foot and ankle specifically was something that I gravitate towards. And while a lot of people talk about sports injuries and the like, I used to do Indian classical dance. I used to break dance. I used to do so. I've like literally busted my ankles like a zillion times over. And I think a lot of foot and ankle stuff just kind of came to me. I just understood, it just clicked in a way that no other discipline of orthopedics sort of did. And that was sort of, hey, I'm like, hey, I'm going to pivot into this, and here we are. And then I've been fortunate enough to interact with Janae, and then obviously Ariana over the last handful of years. So really happy to be here and kind of share the story and share some perspective.
I just want to say one thing too, just to point out that we're both foot and ankle specialists and we're kind of the coolest specialty. So keep that as an open mind. We need more really good, solid foot and ankle people. But just saying, we could have been
We're
any
not
specialty.
we're not biased. I will say though, out of all of my I mean, there's lots of great elements to what in any discipline. But I will say, and Ariana can probably speak to this too. For me, as like when I decided on foot and ankle specifically, I wanted to be able to fire on all cylinders, right? I wanted to be able to navigate my personal life, navigate research, navigate educational stuff, navigate entrepreneurial industry. I want to be able to do all of that. And foot and ankle is probably one of those fields where you can do everything, like genuinely do everything if you want. In some of the other disciplines, it becomes really hard because there's only so many total knee and total hips you can design. And usually it's the same group of people that are constantly doing that. Whereas in foot and ankle, or even disciplines like hands, similarly, there's just so many different things you could be a part of, whether it be on research, whether it be on industry involvement, and so on. So food for thought. Happy to chat about that too.
Well, if anyone is a budding foot and ankle specialist, definitely reach out to them. And if we have time at the end, you can also answer some questions about pursuing that. I'm currently on my interviews for peds ortho, and I got to say, peds foot and ankle, I really like. The adult foot and ankle, I'll leave it to you all. But it's definitely foot and ankle is so complex and incredible. So I hope all of you, if you end up in orthopedics, definitely give it a good consideration. So the first thing I would just wanted to start off with is if someone has an idea and they're like, how can I get this project up and running? Can you talk through what does that process look like from thinking of the idea, talking to whoever's in your research department to write an IRB? Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of variation depending on if it's a medical student versus an attending that is coming up with this idea. But what does that process look like from your guys' perspective?
I'll jump in. So actually, Janae, you'll appreciate this. I did a 10-year-old bunion recently, and I did it at MIS, which was even cooler. So I would say that for me, when people ask me about research and they come up with ideas, like now it's not always easy to do it exactly this way, but I actually say stop. And I say, I want you to come hang out, ideally, hang out with me in clinic first. And part of the reason is research at large, you can always come up with a research question, you can always come up with something. But I think a lot of what, like I look at as an editor, as I look at as a reviewer, and I'm sure Ariana does similarly, is that what is the clinical relevance? Because just because you can publish on it doesn't mean it makes a lick of difference, to be honest. And while you can get anything published anywhere, especially if you decide to pay a $2,000 open access fee, the reality is that if you're looking to do good research, you need to understand clinical context, right? So shadowing in whatever the discipline may be, I think is a great way to not only sort of get a feel for what subject matter is of interest to you, for one, but what questions might be valuable to. And then finally, allow you to sort of take some of those questions and look in the literature and therefore, kind of find where the gaps are. Like, what are the questions we're, asking on a regular basis? What do we not understand? What are we having? What are we struggling with? And there's so much of that, whether it be foot and ankle or anything else for that matter. But I think that's at least sort of the initial arc of how someone should at least think about coming with an idea before moving forward. Ariana?
Yeah, I think that's a great point because, I mean, first of all, for you to actually understand what you're researching, you want to be able to, if you can see that in person, shadow the physician you're working with, do a little bit of learning just about the injury pattern, the treatment. That's going to help you just have basic knowledge. I remember when I was in my research year as a medical student and I was like assigned projects and I'm like, I don't even know. It was like a surgical tech. I was like, I don't even know what the ankle bone is. Like I was just like, I don't even know what any of this is. Like it was just so foreign. And so I think starting just with like basic understanding of like the concepts is going to be really helpful. With that said, if you are working in either an academic hospital with attendings who are doing research and you have that luxury, definitely trying to make an organic connection is helpful. As Dr. Aiyer said, start shadowing and start with that so that you have a one-on-one relationship and then you can get involved, especially if they already have like a research working group. You can then kind of tag into that and they can sort of help guide you and lead the way. If you don't necessarily have that luxury, either finding someone within the institution that who you know might publish versus reaching out to different various groups, whether that's mentorship groups like Remortho or MSOS or RJOS or there's so many different platforms and trying to get connected with people who do that. I would say starting small and working your way up is also really useful. So when I have students come on board who maybe haven't necessarily done a lot of research, maybe I'm not able to get them to work with me in person. Maybe they are going to do something remote with me. Starting with projects that are systematic reviews or meta-analyses, these are projects that are very easy for students to be part of because A, you don't need an IRB, you don't need patient data, so there's no HIPAA compliance. All you need is time and a computer and access to online resources, like PubMed. There's different platforms like Covidence and all these things to collect articles. So that's something that's very easy for you to get involved in. Now, you're not going to know the step-by-step process, so you're going to need someone who is going to handhold you a little bit, whether that's a senior resident, whether that's an attending. But the goal for you in these beginning stages is to understand and research yourself. How do I conduct a systematic review? Like, read about that. Like, what is a systematic review? What is a meta-analysis? How do I make tables and format? And once again, you're not expected to do this all on your own. You should not be expected to come up with a research project all on your own at this point, because how are you going to know what's going to be clinically relevant versus not, or what's been done? But one of the things I do like to empower my students to do is, if you have interest in something and now once again, don't email someone, be like cold email and be like, I want to do research with you, have no thought or anything, or say, I've gotten the messages of like, I really want to do like a shoulder arthroplasty study. And I'm just like, well, that's really great, but like, I am not your audience. I'm not a person who's going to now do shoulder arthroplasty research, probably not the expert there, right? So, also like understanding who you're working with, but like doing some data, like, hey, I looked in the literature. I really like sporty foot and ankle. I noticed that there's this new technique using a minimally invasive approach. There's not a ton of data out there. What do you think of us? Is there a topic that we can do, right? Like starting with that and starting with systematic reviews, meta-analyses. Those are very easy ways to get started in understanding one type of research study.
And you guys highlighted there really importantly that systematic reviews and a lot of reviews tend to be easier in large part because they don't necessarily need to have like an IRB. And I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about how you differentiate what studies need an IRB. For example, when I first started, I didn't realize survey studies needed an IRB. Even though it didn't involve patient data, it was just asking people a survey. So that was something I quickly realized was going to make what I thought was a simple idea end up being over a year's worth of hard work. So if you guys could talk a little bit about what are types of projects that might need an IRB and potentially what are kind of the different categories of projects. You guys have already highlighted quite a few.
Yeah, I'll jump in and add some additional thought here. So I think that what's really important is I think clinical context, but it's not always. I'm going to take it from sort of this top-down approach because in general, like you heard both, we both did research years, and researchers have sort of become taboo in a lot of ways because a lot of people have this sort of expectation, oh, you need to do research here to get into whatever residency. Like in dermatology, it's very common for that to be the case. But at least in the orthopedic world, if you and I have like there's an invited article coming out not so distant future, kind of speaking to both sides of the equation. Because if you go to some places, it's just about putting out the papers, but no relationship built with the people that you're hoping to seek guidance, mentorship, and whatever for. Then on the flip side is, can research be used as a conduit towards, those things, right? And then in that setting where mentorship and relationships are super important, how important is the research itself, right? And I think it's a very fine line. And so I would just encourage you that it may not always be easy, and certainly from an osteopathic perspective, you don't always have direct access to people at your respective institutions. But to Ariana's point, bring up, like look at not just locally, look at regionally, look at nationally, look at different programs. And Dimensions as has a great summer program for those who are kind of still in their first year, as it were. Look at research years, so that way you can try to build out those relationships if you don't have them, because that becomes particularly valuable sort of on the out, kind of at the tail end of all this. You've done all this research, you could have 30 something publications, but if you don't have someone supporting your application for residency specifically, even though this is not exactly the topic of this conversation, it becomes really important, right, to think about that, as well. I will say, as far as like, hey, how do I think about a research project, right? Someone comes to me with an idea. I definitely, irrespective of how they came up with it, I want to know that, hey, what's the clinical relevance? Hasn't been done yet, right? So has there been a literature search? And then what's easy about it? So if there has been some stuff that's all over the place, and I think at the point brought up, a review article, systematic or meta-analysis can be done because that's just a great way to understand what's out there in the literature. That then serves as sort of that's the substrate off of which you can now start building. Okay, in my patient population, what am I going to start evaluating as it relates to this particular idea? And that's where you can start thinking about, okay, what are my control groups? Say, what am I like? What patients do I want to look at? What techniques? What like outcomes? And anytime there's patient data, that's an IRB is required, right? Anytime there's patient data. I would also say an IRB is almost always required for almost anything that involves privacy of any type. And meaning that if there's like personnel information of some sort, it almost always requires IRB. The only time IRB is not required is if there's everything's totally de-identified. And even then, sometimes you have to get a IRB exemption for that anyway, just because they want that documented. Or specifically, if it's like, listen, it's sometimes like laboratory studies and basic science, where you're not doing anything, you're not using patient data, applicant data, staff data, or anything of that type. And so, if you think that it might be an IRB, chances are you should just submit it, even if it doesn't require it, right? Because usually the exemptions are what the journals will want to see. Do you have an IRB exemption? They'll want to know that. They'll want to know the number for documentation purposes. I would then say, then, hey, once you've sort of come up with that idea, what's that control study? Then you're looking to see, hey, like, how am I building this out? Is it a case control? Is it a retrospective review? Is it prospective? Are we going to collect data? Who is going to be involved? How are you building this team around you? Because to Ariana's point, the last thing I'll say is a lot of this and these ideas are not single-handedly done. It's very rare. It's really hard. And honestly, the way I think about it is I never want any one person to feel you already have a ton of shit that you're doing in school, right? You should never feel like you're being burdened, right? Drowning in all the stuff that's going on. So you have to have a team built around you. It may not be you building that team. It might be a resident, it might be a faculty member, but there should be a team with as clearly defined roles as possible. So no one's inadvertently getting hosed. Because the last thing, and I'll finish by saying this, is authorship, right? Everyone wants a piece of the pie, right? So it's really important to define this as early as you can, early on, so no one gets, pardon my French, screwed up. Well, I shouldn't swear on here, you're recording. So no one gets screwed over. So the reality is like, who's going to be first, who's going to be second, who's going to be third, who's going to be fourth, who's going to be last, whatever. And that should be as clearly defined as possible, no matter even as once you have the idea, so that way no one feels that they're being cheated out of an authorship in that room.
So you highlighted about the authorship order, and that's something that I know has not always been clearly defined. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the responsibility of a first author, especially from an attending's perspective, and you have a student or a resident that is the first author. What is the expectations? What are things that you've seen students or residents do that help set them apart? And then also, if you can talk about the senior author or being listed as like the last author and how that process works and how that is sort of determined from your perspective.
Sure. So, as far as I do underscore what Dr. Aiyer just said about defining roles and responsibility early on. It's important that, and that's something that I try to do with my team members to say, this person is taking the lead on this project. This is going to be an assist, second, third author, etc. In addition, I think number one, it's having really good communication with your team members when it comes to questions you may have, because once again, we as senior people don't want you having to repeat your work because one little thing you forgot to ask us about, and then you have to go back and do the whole thing or collect the whole thing. We want to make your life as easy as possible. And so if you're working with someone who is truly a good team leader, that open connection and dialogue is going to be there, and you shouldn't be scared to ask the question, particularly if it's going to prevent you from moving on to the next step. Also, I think if you're the lead person, establishing a good rapport as the lead. So if you have to report back about deadlines and be honest about them, right? We don't know what your life looks like, and school comes first if you're doing this simultaneously honestly, if you're not taking a time off for it. If you have junior members that are maybe working for you and maybe they're not pulling their weight too, and that's the delay, you don't want to throw people under the bus. Obviously, trying to resolve things on your own is important first. But if there's concerns, having the ability to be honest and just being direct and upfront about the work, just so that things can be moved along appropriately. When it comes to what my level of expectations, obviously that is dependent on your experience and really the role. Oftentimes if you're the first time working with me, I'm not really putting you in the role of first author, usually, because I don't think that's fair. I remember when I started, when I was in medical school, and the amount of red ink lined, and that was when like things were handwritten more than on the computer, line after line about my paper wasn't scientific writing enough, or I wasn't having a beginning, middle, end of the story that we were just going to tell about our data. Scientific writing is not something that comes natural, and it is something that takes time. Just like you're going to work hard to be a surgeon, you're going to have to work hard to develop those writing skills in a scientific manner. And that's only going to take time and experience. So usually I will not throw you as lead author. I will have you assist with the paper so that you can learn the process of that. As far as if you are a lead author, you're really the captain of the ship. You're the one communicating with me directly more often. You're setting the deadlines, and we're coming up with time frames to get things done. I usually always recommend, I like to be in communication more. So normally I'll have you write a methods and a results section for me first. We look at it together. We figure out what's going on. Then I help draft an outline of an intro. Then we draft a discussion outline. You're really in charge of writing that entire manuscript and putting it together because you're taking the lead responsibility. Your second and third authors are helping with the data collection, and then they are also helping with revisions and edits as well. One thing I would look up is ICJME guidelines. These are authorship guidelines. You really need to be hitting those to be considered an author, technically. And a lot of the journals want to know, what have you done? So, there have been programs and institutions that I call it a Ponzi scheme, where there's like a million people throwing on all these different projects to get numbers. And I will tell you, and Tabs, I don't know how it is on your side, when I'm interviewing residents and students for residency, it's not necessarily about the number of publications that they have. Like, I want to know, are they first author on some of these? And if I ask them a question about it, can they talk to me about their research? Do they have a good understanding of what they've done? So I know that they played an active role. I'd rather see someone with 5 to 7 publications that can actively talk about those than someone who's got 25 publications and really didn't do much for those. And then, Tabs, I'll let you expand and maybe talk about the PI position so that I'm not talking away here.
No, you're good. You're good. I know. I think those are all really important points. I'm probably not as, just because my life is super, super, super crazy nonstop. I I don't I don't necessarily have deadlines as much, and I kind of let the team at large. So I usually will build, if someone has an idea, I have an idea, and I usually have like a team of people. I will usually say, okay, so let this person sort of take the lead on this, and everyone else sort of follows suit. And the idea is to help spread the wealth around, right? So I'm very cognizant about intentionally picking a person to take the lead, unless someone brought the idea to me, in which case they take the lead, and then and then they can kind of like, hey, like sort of divvy up the roles. To me, I think similarly as Dr. Gianakos, because she keeps calling me Dr. Aiyer, the reality is that they are the person who is driving everything. But that means I don't necessarily expect them to write the entire manuscript from my perspective, but they are in charge of organizing everything. They should definitely be writing the majority of it. But I would also say it's a great way to get people who may be younger, less experienced, writing parts of it. Could be like with the results section, or with some of the discussion or whatever. So that way they can all kind of like take turns getting used to that, especially if there's younger folks who have not had that experience to date just yet, and they can kind of get that under the belt. But the reality is that questions that do come up should really kind of come, it can come from anybody. But again, like there's usually the lead person or the first author or even the second author sometimes are the folks that are kind of like saying, hey, like, the audibles that need to be like made in order to say, hey, like this data needs to be reevaluated, or like we have to do this or go back or whatever. And I try to obviously just stay connected with everybody as much as they can. And I try to say, hey, like, what's the status of things? And obviously, the more engaged they are, or I can be, then the more engaged they are, and then kind of pushes things forward. Because there's twofold things, and it goes into this piece. So at Hopkins at least, which is particularly like heinous for promotion purposes. If you're supposed to have like X number of publications to get promoted, right? Historically, anyway. And so I, like as the person who sort of like oversaw the project, tend to take a more senior role. But I also recognize like, hey, if this was not my idea, like from the start, and irrespective of whether I'm helping to shepherd it, then I don't also feel that I deserve that senior role, right? Like I will give that to one of my colleagues, or I'll say, hey, no, so and so should be. I just told someone yesterday, so and so should be like on, they should be the senior author on this because this is not like something that I've been pushing forward, but obviously like I'm part of the team, so include me as sort of the second senior author. The senior author is really the person who's I consider, or the last author is considered like the PI on the project. And so they're the one who are going to be sort of most like they're the ones who oversee and basically troubleshoot and kind of like really direct things if there are issues that are coming up with the way the data is being now analyzed, or if there's like a shortage of response rate, or what have you. And it's great because it does signify like a lot of times people go to the senior author for content about an article or interest on it, but they go to the first author or the senior author. And it's not that everyone else in between doesn't matter. They totally do. And I don't personally care. I personally just don't care if a student is first author, second author, last author. If you're interviewing with me, you had better know what that article is about. If you're anywhere on that article, you need to act like it's your first, like you're the first author or the senior author for that matter, right? That's like really important. I bring up the promotion piece of Hopkins because I'm currently in the throes of promotion, and like I'm like monitoring every single article where I'm like the last author. And so while of course there has been data that looks to okay, how many first author positions do you have and so on, I think to Dr. Janakis' point is you don't have to have 1,000 publications. But if you have like a handful and you can speak articulately, eloquently, and describe how significant your role was, then that's going to carry a lot of weight down the line, and not just have to sort of like meet a metric off of a stupid scale that someone may be thinking about.
Thank you
Okay.
for all those helpful points. And I wanted to just emphasize how important that is when you come to an interview to know your papers. Just on Friday, I had another fellowship interview, and one of the attendings asked me about a systematic review from well over a year ago, and I had no idea they had a personal interest in it. It wasn't on their website, but thank goodness I always do a quick run through all my papers beforehand, because otherwise it looks really poorly on you, especially if you're listed, as a first, second author. But once again, even if you're the last author, make sure you do another review. We have some questions. First, I think, Christopher, you have your hand up if you want to go ahead and ask your question first.
Yeah, you guys hear me okay? All right. Thank you for your guys' time. I'm a baby first year, so this is a long ways for me. But in terms of when you're applying for residency for ortho, if you're someone that's looking at a potential resident and you're looking at the papers they have, regardless of the quality and the quantity, but just like the makeup, if they're ortho based or non-ortho based, how much weight does that go into it? Because I'm sure a lot of like colleagues like myself, we like ortho. We either maybe get into it later than other medical students, or we got into some other research beforehand. And if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think in general, it's good to just be able to demonstrate that you have been involved in research, number one. So better to have any kind of research that once again you've been actively involved in and you can speak to. So if you were doing like an emergency medicine or maybe a gen surge or something, as long as you were actively involved and can talk about that appropriately, that demonstrates that you have the knowledge to be able to conduct research. So I think in general, if you're like, do I do this kind of research or none? I would definitely pursue the research that you have maybe in attending in connection with. Once you decide orthopedics is really the thing you want to do, though, it would be helpful and useful to have research in the field of orthopedics. And maybe even if you don't have a true orthopedic mentor, if there's a way that you could spin off some studies, right? Maybe in the emergency room, what are some orthopedic traumas that come in? Or maybe if you're with internal medicine and you can talk about, okay, how do, on the women's side of things, how do hormone changes affect musculoskeletal health? Or, there's a lot of different non-op sports medicine, right? There's a lot of ways you can maybe go about that if you maybe don't necessarily have like a heavy hitter research person in ortho. I think in the beginning, first and second years, if you just have general research, and I think that's very helpful to have, and you can talk about it. And then if you're able to get one or two studies in the orthopedic realm, I think that's also helpful too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think the biggest thing, so it's obviously great if you can get ortho stuff in part because it goes back to the thing I brought up earlier. It's about really connections. And I think and the reason connections become important is because, I'll give you two examples. One is my research fellow from last year who, just finished. And, when she started, she started with a bunch and she'll end up with like a handful of publications, but she didn't have a ton. But she spent a ton of time scrubbing with me, clinical work, et cetera. And I'm not joking when I tell you, I mean, she functions like a PGY2. Like that's how like legit she is. And suffice to say, she was worried with her step score was sub 250, and she was worried about like how many and she's applying from an institution that has like a ton of people apply every year, and she was worried about like, hey, like, am I going to do well? Like, how many interviews am I going to get? All this. She ended up with like close to 15 or 20 interviews, and went on, I think, like probably the majority. And she just told me what her number one is like earlier. So my whole point in saying that is it wasn't so much for her, it wasn't about like all the pubs she was doing. It was the fact that she had spent this time and had established a relationship with two people, not even about being connected, right? Like, like the other person who is a part of the fellowship is like exceedingly well connected and but it was the fact that we could speak very honestly about her like prospects as an orthopedic resident, right? Which are huge. And that's what people want to see. And I think what happens, and then you couple that to another situation where there was a person doing a research year, probably a ton of publications in, had picked that research year literally for that reason, and had gotten, I'm not joking when I tell you, like literally one interview offer. And they were 250 plus, solid grades, reasonable institution. So where's the disconnect? And the reason I bring this up is because it's not just about the numbers. And so if you're going to go do ortho research, you have to have sort of the people around you, going back to this team mentality, especially on the resident/faculty side, who can sort of A, guide you, but then also B, speak about your capabilities. So I think getting involved with research is huge. And that's super important, irrespective of discipline. But I think it's really important to also get involved with that specialty research more so than the research, also about the, kind of leveraging the relationships that kind of stem from that.
And I want to piggyback off of that with emphasizing how important those relationships are. For those of you that were like me, where I didn't have an academic institution, I didn't have faculty and residents to work with. The first time I actually worked with like residents was on my audition rotations. And the advice that I give and I pass on to you all is look for like a community orthopedic surgeon. I did a lot of cold emails just trying to find someone and basically find someone that you can really develop a good relationship with for that month. Because if you can get a really strong letter of recommendation and potentially develop a mentor from that person, compared to you kind of work with like a bunch of people and you don't necessarily build a good relationship, you don't get as strong of letters. That was something that I found very, very helpful. And like I said, I was like just emailing people at different hospitals in the area because my school didn't have any connections. So if you are in that position, don't give up hope and just know it might feel awkward, but it is something you can absolutely do. And that's where that might also be an opportunity to consider doing a research year or setting yourself up for success with doing more of that networking, especially if you come from a similar background to like what I was describing. Did you guys have any comments on that regard?
Yeah, I was going to say too, I think that's such a critical thing because while research is what you are all thinking is the number one thing. I mean, for me, research was just a tool for me to network, and it was how I actually made really great relationships with my mentors who are still mentors to me now to this day, who are now my friends, who got, because of those relationships, I was able to do posters, podiums, then got invited to speak, got additional research opportunities. And that just really spun off. What I will say is, though, is that it's really important for you to be on your A game. So, meaning you can't just like come and do research and just think, okay, I'm going to collect some data and think like the world's going to change for you, right? Research is hard work. And I will tell you, there is a huge dichotomy in people who have worked with me where I will go to war and bat for them to get into programs and to connect them with wherever they want to go, or if they want to work with someone. And then there's another dichotomy where I do offer still very valid support. But if you cannot email me back appropriately and timely, if you're lying about your deadlines or you're not able to be open about deadlines, if you don't get things done, if you don't work with your team members, I need someone who is reliable, who is honest. I don't expect you to know anything when it comes to research. I don't expect you to know literally anything. You just have to show up and want to work hard and be open to learn and be teachable. Like even to this day, I joke I'm teachable in the OR. Like I learn things from my residents and I learn things from my reps. And so, because what'll happen is if you can demonstrate that you're a hardworking, reliable individual, you will then be, for me, the next person that gets invited to do the book chapter, the next person that then I'm an ortho editor for AOS now. I need residents and students who are editing articles. You're the person I'm reaching out to because Tabs and I we like research, we do it, but do we want to do all the nitty gritty stuff that we did when we were medical students? Absolutely not. Like, I don't ever want to do that again. Like, no offense. Like, I did it, happy I did it, I learned it, but I want people who want to work hard to be my team member now, and that's their role. And then by doing that, your relationship with that person will become so organic and they will support you and actually sponsor you. And if you want to rotate somewhere, or hey, you want to go to this orthopedic residency program. Well, I know a hand person here. Let's collaborate on a research project with that hand person. I'll introduce you so you get your connection to that program and so forth. So I just want to stress that because I feel like sometimes it's good that you're being proactive and asking for help, but you also have to bring to the table. It's a bi-directional relationship. Tabs and I we both are very much into mentorship, but people have to remember that a lot of people are busy. Orthopedic surgeons are busy. Like this is our volunteer time, but we want to do that, right? I know Tabs has a similar mentality. I want to be the person I needed when I was going through your stages that maybe I didn't have. But you have to remember, those people are giving you their time. So we expect you to also be respectful of our time and work really hard too. And if you do that, that's how your relationship will blossom. And for me, that's really how I made a lot of the connections.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that, and I think that there's probably a level of tolerance that like Ariana and I probably have relative to many other people out there, that for better or for worse, because this is just kind of our jam. But that's folks like us, I would say, are the minority in terms of sort of willingness to do things like this as a whole from a faculty perspective. Because what you kind of quickly have to realize is like there is so much going on at any one point in time once you're in practice. It becomes really hard to sort of carve out time for yourself. You have families, if you have that, then your work obligations, literally like a zillion notes to sign. I mean, I literally right before this, the reason I'm still in my suits because I was putting my kids to bed right before I came to do this, and or get to giving them a bath. My wife's putting them to bed, but the point is, there's all this stuff you're juggling, so you have to figure out sort of when you're connecting with people who are taking the time or trying to take time, it's a mutual respect thing, right? And can I say I'm perfect at it? No, absolutely not. But genuinely, if you're looking to sort of learn from somebody who has gone through, has their own shared experience, and looking to learn those things, then it's important to sort of like, show up and demonstrate like who you can be and like, hey, like why it's worth taking a chance on you, and or developing a connection, right? Because just like what I tell people is not everyone's gonna be your cup of tea. People are gonna talk to me and probably just like patients. People will talk to me as I meant this guy's crazy. I'm going over like next door to like Mercy or Maryland or whatever. And that's fine. That's fine if they want to do that. But the reality is that you have to sort of find your tribe, right? Find your people. And by talking to different people, get a feel for, hey, where do you jive? Like, who's vibing in the same way, and then make those connections and then use that connection to sort of start having these conversations about like, life in practice, life in residency, research and research ideas and so on and so forth. But if you got to start somewhere, and I would say perhaps the biggest no-no in my mind is people start something, but then they don't finish it, right? Or listen, I can understand like people like get busy. I get it, but it's on you, out of respect to say, hey, like I've had a pivot. I'm into ophthalmology now, or I'm into derm, or I'm into plastics. It's like, hey, so like I like to find someone who I can hand the reins on this project off to. And that is something that people have a very tough time doing because people don't like conflict. Two, people don't want to feel like they're letting anybody down. But three, it's also you're taking an opportunity from someone else, and someone else who might be interested may want to be a part of that. So that's where you have to also think like, hey, it's about respect for your fellow classmates in addition to the people that you're working with. And it's not about a working for, right? It's all a team mentality. But I think those are other elements that you got to be aware of as well.
I love that you just said that like not finishing. I have projects that have gone on for far too long, and they were projects that I don't really need to do. I'm not benefiting from this. Like, I don't need them. Some of them I do, right? Some of them are like really my, core projects. But then there are some that I'm like, I want to help students out. And it's up to you to kind of pave the way. And if you're stuck at a roadblock, if you're working with a good mentor, you just talk with them and say, hey, I don't know how to do this part, or I need some help with this, or you know what, I had this life thing happen to me and I don't feel like I'm capable of finishing this. I want to help in any capacity. Can I transfer this work to someone that can take it over? Happy to help with that transition, right? We would take that, like just being upfront. That's all going back to reliability, openness, honesty. Like that's all we want is someone who we can talk to and rely on. And I will say, like, I feel like both of us are very forgiving people, but when that happens, you lose your credibility to someone, and that is ultimately a loss in maybe not a relationship with them, but it is going to be a loss in their ability to trust you and support you and sponsor you going forward. So this is a really nice way to like showcase yourself. And it's not about how much research you can do and how smart you are or how good you are at orthopedics. It's really just, do you have the drive to be reliable, which you need to be a great surgeon?
It's actually really funny because it doesn't just, I mean, what's kind of, what's interesting is you would think that by the time you're out in practice, this kind of stuff would fade away, right? So we had so for those of you who know that I do this thing called Ortho Mentor, we had a book that, and I don't say that to sound coy about it, just like, not everyone's familiar, but so we had a book that came out and it was with the AAOS, and it was sort of the first textbook for students looking to do orthopedic rotations, and it came out probably around 2 years ago now. And what was interesting is the reason it got delayed. It was an idea that I had come up with in the throes of COVID, and it literally took that long to like actually publish it. And the reason that happened is because a former, I would call mentor, slash colleague and friend, someone I've known for a very long time, literally would not finish the chapter that they had been assigned to. And this was a chapter that I wanted to be predominantly faculty written because it needed to be from educators who had deep interest and understanding about what students should know when they're approaching whatever the subject matter might be, but ankle, spine, whatever. And this person single handedly held up the book production because of the lack, they never communicated, like straight up. And the lead editor and I were constantly trying to reach out, nothing, 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 nothing. And then eventually, when we got a chapter almost 18 months later, okay, it was only a third of what it needed to be done. So then I had to scramble to get now a bunch of people who could write the section or the rest of it for the production. So not only does that make me look bad to everyone involved, like, bro, what the fuck is, sorry, Janae, what the F is happening here? But the reality is that that's ridiculous, right? Because it's not just about me, it's about all the authors, it's about the publisher, everybody, like what is happening. And that is just not a good look. And so, believe you me, you would think this would be done like by the time you're like a grown ass adult, but it still happens. But the thing is, the moral of the story is be respectful, be communicative, even if it feels hard. Just take a deep breath. It'll probably be okay. It'll actually be worse if you don't say anything. Truth be told.
It's like a great vent session for Tabs and I, but it's actually really good you're hearing this because tough love is the best love, and you need to know like what's gonna make us mad, right?
Yeah.
Like,
No,
so I think
this is
that this is the most
perfect.
critical part.
And I
And
was going to jump on that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and obviously, Dr. Gianakos and I are two of the most angry people around, clearly.
My residents told me, so like I'm like disappointed dad. I've realized like they just are like I don't really get mad, and I believe I'm captain of the ship in the R, like right, like it's just but they told one of them was like Dr. G will like she'll kill for you or she's going to kill you. I was just like, okay, I don't know if that's like a good thing. But yeah, but I feel like yeah, Tabs and I feel like are both cut from the same cloth. Like we want to help you. Like that's our goal. We're not doing this for fun for ourselves. We do want to help you. So I think we're in the same way, like just a way we're respectful of your time. We just would like that back too.
I mean, just the fact that you guys are taking the time to be here to talk to all these students and pay forward that knowledge is, we can't say thank you enough. And I just wanted to jump on the use of AI since we're kind of talking about professionalism. I had a
Mm.
student that basically their writing quality wasn't great. And so I tried to give them some pointers and they came back and what they sent to me was like, there's no way they wrote this. And unfortunately, it was AI. And after a bunch of emails, they finally admitted that they used AI to write it because they were afraid of continuing to not write quality. And that to me highlights, I think, what you guys were getting at was the importance of honesty and the importance of that professional integrity. And I'm sure you guys have had situations like that, but it was a situation that I want everyone here on the call to hear that you might potentially feel tempted to use AI or alter your writing in a way that is not true to you or compromise your professionalism. And it is so critical that instead you ask for help and you take feedback as opposed to trying to cheat the system. I don't know if you guys have any additional comments on that, but that was something that completely caught me off guard, and I was just horrified that that was the case because I also, like you all, think I'm very kind. So the fact the student was intimidated to even share honestly with me made me start to question myself.
Yeah, I think, I don't even think it has anything to do with you. I think that AI, and there's good and bad and with AI in general, which we're going to see in all different facets of medicine. It's super easy to be tempted to utilize AI when it's so difficult to write a scientific manuscript. Like that's the hard thing to do. I will say I do have, for all my students who are writing papers, I have them fill out and sign a thing that they're not going to be doing that. And they understand that that is not to be part of that. If I do look and find out, or if there's any kind of concern with that potentially, and we get that figured out, they're off the manuscript. As simple as that. And I have them sign it ahead of time because I will not, there's a zero tolerance for me with people who are cheating, plagiarizing, any of that. It's really hard though, because, uh, you know, you're learning how to write, and it can be intimidating to try to, you write it once, you get it back. It's not at the level, you write it again. But then you have to remember, like, at least this is how I feel. I go back to when you're a surgeon, you're the captain of your ship, right? So it is up to the senior person to know the roles and responsibilities of those who are involved in the team and also know the level of those players, right? So, I always do a sports analogy, right? Basketball, right? You got your guards, you got your forwards, you got your centers, right? Like, same thing when you're recruiting your team in. If I'm putting out a first year medical student and telling him to write an entire manuscript by himself without any senior person editing that, that is completely unfair to put on that medical student. They're set up for failure. That's just unless they are some brilliant genius person, I would never expect them to be able to write something at the level. So I normally, that's why, number one, you're usually not the first author in the first manuscript you're working with me on. Number two, if you are starting your first paper, I usually have a resident or someone who has written several papers with me that I can actively rely on. And that role of that person is to edit with that person, so that by the time that manuscript comes to me, it's the best version possible, right? You always want to put your best version of yourself forward with this. But it's not fair to someone who's never written before for us to expect that. I will tell you, I've had residents who have slacked and I've gone after them and said, did you edit this? This is not the level that this should be. The only reason you're on this manuscript is to help with manuscript drafting. And you're not going to be on the manuscript if this is not done, right? So I'm coming across as really like a hard ass. I'm sorry. Like I feel like I'm like really like NFL coach, like let's go. But like I'm passionate about this enough because I think I was someone who worked really hard and didn't get credit on a lot of things I did. And so we've all been there before. And so I'm really, really uh, tuning into detail of who's doing what. And also, I don't believe you should knock someone down if they're not capable of doing it at that point, right? Like, so I think part of it is knowing the level and knowing when someone needs help, right? And trying to make this a safe space for them to be able to ask for help.
Oh no, this is great. Um, Obviously, so AI is a very we're at kind of this major digital inflection point with AI, right? So it's kind of like what the web was when it first came out a handful of years ago, or however many years ago. It's like what the EMR was when it first got introduced into like our world. At every point, there's sort of this like taboo thing that then becomes part of mainstream. And I think what is kind of freaking out a lot of people at large is sort of the potential for sort of shenanigans, right? And we even saw that there was definitely someone we were reviewing during for rank. Their personal statement was definitely AI written, interestingly enough. And I'm sure we have a paper that's kind of in throes of getting accepted on letters of recommendation with AI and ability to detect biases that way, or biases with it. And what's crazy is that there's a lot of good that can be done, but unfortunately, we always think about the things that are just more scary and like potentially harmful, right? And a lot of the hallucinations that we think about, like, hey, it's kind of references being created and that are not real, and so on and so forth, because like it's a people pleaser, so it wants to give you an answer you like, right? That's how it works. And so it's sort of like, and then you get a dopamine hit in your brain. And then when you go back into it, it's like a dopamine hit for it, right? It's designed to be the same way. So every time you keep working with it, it's like its own sort of like internal drug, right? Internal pleasure sensor that you're stimulating. So that is where you specifically have to become very adept at prompt engineering and how you ask the questions, how you ask it to do what to do, and you have to critique it, right? So this is where if you're using AI in some capacity to help with things, then it's how do you use it responsibly as part of that. And I don't think, and I think that's why I say this is a huge inflection point, because AI in research, AI in publication, AI in whatever, right? Like it's here to stay. I pitched open evidence, the concept of open evidence, which many of you may be familiar with. I pitched that to Walter Kluver's before open evidence came out, and Walter Kluver shut it down immediately. They were like, no, we won't do it. Da, 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 da. And then because they were worried about copyright stuff, going back to New York Times, like recent lawsuits and things of that nature. And then literally open evidence comes out. I'm like, yeah, crazy, right? Like crazy. You guys are like, anyways, point is that if you can use AI, you can use it, but it shouldn't replace, it should supplement, but not replace the art of writing. It should not replace the thought process that goes into like what deductions, what analysis are you doing. It should not replace it. Arya and I probably do something called it's called a lateral ankle ligament reconstruction, and there is a company that both of us have probably one of us more involved with than another. That they have a special thing called an internal brace. And for those of you who pay attention to professional sports, like people have had it all over the place for a variety of things. But the idea behind it is it's designed to augment what you have done yourself. So AI is designed to, if anything, augment what you have done. It should not replace the work that you need to put in. And that is definitely something I like, feel very strongly about. And so when like people say, "Oh, I use AI," I was like, "What did you do? How'd you do it? Give me more insight." I'm not as cool to like do like a whole like sign an NDA type thing, but I would definitely
Not an
say that
NDA.
yeah.
Just
It just sounded more
talking to
appropriate.
me, you
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
sign
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. But the whole point is that like you have to be careful, right? And people are picking up on this. And there's now every journal has like these detection capabilities as well,
Hmm.
as has it been like generated by AI. So, for instance, if like when I was like coming up with like my promotion letter, I was like, how do I write for 7 pages about myself? This is like ridiculous. I can't do that. So I sat there on a flight to Saudi Arabia and I was messing around with ChatGPT because, of course, what else am I doing on a flight to Saudi Arabia for however long? And I was going back and forth with it. And I said, hey, like, do this, this, and that. And then I realized it came up with some stuff, but it was hilarious. It's like, Amitabh Aiyer is like the greatest gift to orthopedic surgery since the invention of the scalpel. And I'm like, okay, you can't be saying shit like that. I'm like, that's just ridiculous. Like, that's not even true. And the problem is that it's just interesting to think like you could just take that, someone could just submit it and no big deal. And like, you would sound like a complete fool. So my whole point in saying all this is even for research, it can be valuable, but you just have to know how to use it optimally. Food for thought. Sorry, went on a rant there.
Also, I think like you can use it to help like assist in like, hey, I'm writing up a discussion on X, Y, and Z. What are some like up-to-date literature? And like sometimes it will send you links to articles and stuff. Like that's sometimes useful. Um, and then the other thing I was going to say is yes, they have capabilities of being able to detect this. And can you imagine you write a paper with tabs or I, and then we get this message back being like, this was AI written and we had no clue. Like that's not great. And they'll leave it with one last statement like you're not going to like have someone not support you because you couldn't write a great scientific manuscript, but you will have someone not support you if you lied about using something you did or cheated your way through. Then it's so if you're going to like the lesser of two evils, it's a real big difference in what you'd rather, come across as maybe someone who needs help writing as at a medical student level, which is normal, than someone who can't be trusted.
Thank you both for emphasizing that. And like they said, we all start from somewhere. I look back at my first attempts at scientific writing to now, and I hope in 5 years from now or even a year from now, I'm like, wow, I've grown a lot. Like we should always be striving. We're never gonna be the perfect scientific writer. That's part of the process. So just like they said, make sure that you maintain that integrity and that trust, because that's if you ruin that, I mean, that's basically it. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So there was a question about pursuing a research year. I put in some links, and then also at the Ortho Mentor website, Dr. Tabs has done some incredible direct webinars as well, where he's talked about his journey. So for time's sake, unless you guys want to touch on that, I was gonna just have you guys close off if you have any kind of final thoughts for these very motivated trainees that are excited to get into this field, but are still, like most of us, intimidated by the big names of academics and how to actually become a prolific researcher.
I would just say, first off, thanks for Janae. Thanks for having us. As always, I think it's always great to connect with people and kind of just showcase that we can be real people too, even if we seem like we're in quote unquote this ivory tower. It's definitely not ivory, I'll tell you that. You can look at the carpet in my office. The reality is that getting involved is a place to start building relationships, and it doesn't matter with whom, right? Someone asked, or I think Chris asked earlier about like, hey, does it have to be ortho or any discipline you're interested in? It doesn't have to be. You got to start somewhere, right? Because but it should be ideally with something that you're interested in so you can develop a connection to it and then really feel like, hey, I want to see, push this forward. One thing I didn't say earlier, which I'll end with now, is the moment you start seeing your name in bright lights, like on a publication in print, it's very intoxicating to say the least. It becomes like a drug. And it's so cool to see that. And then eventually, this writing you do now and what you learn to do now will pave the way for what you have to do later, because there will be times you'll be asked to do a commentary, you'll be asked to do this, and it's your personal insight. And if you've never done all this other stuff before and you were relying on AI or relying on someone else to do it for you, it will show. And when people have a certain expectation about sort of who you are and what you bring to the table, you have to be able to sort of like demonstrate that, right? So, I just say don't ever shy away from it. Reach out to people, reach out to us. Time is, now is never, and now or never. And, hopefully not never. Have a great night. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I echo that. Thanks for having us. It's always good to chit chat, and Tabs, it's always good to see you over there. Miss you. I can't say it enough. And I echo what Tab said. It's really about putting the hard yards in now. You're building your platform in order to grow into whatever your goals are, whatever type of surgeon you want to be, orthopedics, whatever that looks like. In order to be the best, you have to put the work in. And we are finding studies are showing that the younger generations are now very reliant on not just computer, internet, but AI. And the level of thought and processing and conflict resolution and everything is going downhill. So if you're losing that skill set to be able to write, as Tab said, if you don't do it and put in the hard yards now, you're not going to be able to do this when you're an attending who are going to be looking out for other people. So put in the effort now, get knocked down a few times, learn, get the red lines through it, be told that this isn't good enough. Like that's the only way you're going to grow. And you're going to bring that type of mentality into your residency. Medical school is 4 years. It feels grueling, but it's only 4 years. Residency is 5 years, right? That's really grueling too. So, I'm like, it's only 9 years, but okay, let's just like take it by, it's a marathon. Okay. But what all that to say is, when you're in residency, it's a finite period of time to hone in your skills to be the best surgeon you can possibly be. If you're not doing those extra hours, if you're not stepping into those extra cases, just like if you're not writing the paper, if you're not building learning how to do a systematic review, data analysis, all of that, you're never going to be able to reach that next step. And then the worst thing is you come out and you're not a competent surgeon, or you're an academic center and you're not able to draft an IRB, you're not able to conduct research, and then what, right? Your goal, you're prepping for your future self by putting the hard yards in now. So that's all I'll say is, I see a lot of people who are like, I want to go home and I want to do this, but it's a privilege to get into orthopedics. It's a privilege to be an orthopedic surgeon. Not many people can do it. So if you have that path and you're going on that, just remember that every day so that when you have your patients, like I can sleep at night because I know like I did the best I could and I worked really hard to be the best surgeon for this patient. But that starts with just like those daily habits of everything you're doing, whether it's research, surgery, and so forth. Being the best dad, right? Same thing, right? So, anyways, reach out anytime. Tabs and I like to chit chat all the time, and maybe we'll do another webinar together, Tabs, on life lessons. So many pearls of wisdom we have here.
Or lack thereof.
We're like, what we did that you shouldn't do. So many of those.
Maybe we'll do one on why you should choose foot and ankle, because
Oh, we love that. Do
that
we
would
love that,
be.
Tabs?
Toe money, toe problems. So, there you go.
I have a
I,
sticker I give out to people that say you are TOE, totally awesome.
Oh.
I'm like, they're like, yeah, no, cool.
I will toast to that.
It's good.
Thank you all so much, and just for your
Oh,
vulnerability. It
adapt
is.
and overcome. Look in the chat. Someone's following. That's right. Adapt and overcome. If you follow me, that's the theme of the day. So
Well, you both
anyway.
are incredible role models. And for those of you who didn't hear in the beginning, so with Dr. Gianakos, I was like kind of a fangirl. And then one day I was like, I'm just going to message her on Instagram. And she was so nice. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she took the time to respond to my message. So, for those of you that are in that position where you're also feeling intimidated, sometimes the hardest step is that cold email where you're prepared, where you have your ideas, or sending that simple message, but it's building those connections. And just know all of us start here, and we should always be striving to grow. Thank you all for taking the time. We are so privileged and lucky to have had you guys talk with us tonight. And for everyone else on the call, I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Have a good night.